Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us to this panel. We'll start by introducing ourselves. I'm Tula Vilagati with the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, Redesigning Blended Courses project. And next to me is this lady who will also tell us who she is.
Thank you, Tila. I'm Nikki Isaacs. I am a tutor coordinator from the EDU, and I oversee the Plus tutorial project as well as teach on one of the introductory courses. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mushumi.
Hi, I'm Mushumi Diu. I teach the course Representations of Africa at the Center for African Studies, and I work in collaboration with the EDU for the same course. Thank you. Pass on to you.
Thank you, Mushumi. My name is Yakulu Dubazana. I'm a trainee learning designer at SALT. I'm also part of the Redesigning Blended Courses project. And hello to the audience at large. Hand over to you, Kristen.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Antonio. I am an educational technology advisor at SALT. And we also have a remote panelist today. I'll hand over to Luna to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Kristen. My name is Luna August. I currently work in the academic development program, but I suppose part of what brings me here was work that I did while I was involved as a tutor and part kind of teaching assistant in the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies. Thanks.
Thank you, Luna. With us, we will be having conversation in pairs. And the first to go is Nikki and I. The work that we are sharing with you, like we've said, is part of the Redesigning Blended Courses project, where we partnered with these fellows from the EDU program in collaborative work on redesigning our blended courses so that they are not just only accessible, but also inclusive to diverse students in our courses. So the first to go is Nikki and I, like I've said. Then the next will be Mushumi and Yakuluntu. Then lastly, Kristen and Luna. The first question that I pose to Nikki is, kindly tell us, Nikki, about your work in this program, the EDU program, the students that you enroll, as well as one of the courses that you teach there. If you want, you can also tell us about the Plus Tats, which form part of this program, as well as the training you've had on UDL. Thank you.
Thank you. So I work with the EDU, which is a central unit based in humanities, which oversees students doing their degree over 4 years. So the extended degree students. Part of their program is that they have to undertake introductory courses as well as Plus tutorials. And both those interventions are aimed at supporting students for success in the faculty. So the Plus Tats are additional forms of teaching tutorial groups, which are also blended spaces. And then the introductory courses are courses which are aimed at supporting students in research and writing in the social sciences. We were lucky enough to undergo UDL training so we could actually implement blended learning for both of those spaces. And it's been quite an interesting journey and a great reception from the students.
Thank you, Nikki. For the benefit of our audience, we would like to share the work we've been doing, as Nikki has shared, that they have had training on the Universal Design for Learning, which is UDL. And as part of UDL, what it helps us with is that it provides us with conceptual tools so that as we redesign our blended courses, we would ensure that our students have multiple means of representation, how knowledge is shared. They also have multiple means of engagement. And our panel today is just focusing on that principle of engagement, how to enhance student engagement in the courses. And then finally, one of the other principles is the principle of action and expression, where the students get enough opportunity to express the knowledge that they are building, as well as to be active, because we're trying to avoid students being passive learners. So Nikki, we noted in your example that one of the guidelines that stands out is that of using multiple media for communication, as well as promoting understanding across various languages. Would you kindly tell us more how you enabled that through your course?
Yeah, sure. So the course has a very diverse language profile. Our students are all South African students, and they speak obviously a variety of the South African languages. And so it was important for us to build on that linguistic capital that the students bring to the space. So we were very specific in the activities that we chose and wanted them to respond to. We encourage students to be able to respond to various images or text in any language that they chose. And that was quite a fun and exciting, I think, way for them to share the languages that they know, but also to stretch their understanding across concepts and understanding. And it was great because they could also play around with languages, which I thought was quite fun for the space. So one example that we had is that we had them watch a video clip of Stuart Hall's theory on media and representation. And then they had to provide an example or a translation of the word representation, an example of that. And it was quite interesting because, you know, the students were amongst themselves debating and negotiating what representation meant in the different languages, and did it really mean this, and should it mean that, and is there a better way to say it? And so through that sort of exchange, they were able to strengthen their understanding, but also bring what they knew to the space, which I think is quite transformative. In terms of power relations of what goes on in the classroom between lecturer and tutor and student. And so that was quite exciting for us. And the other way that we use language in the course is through the instructional text. So we use translation on our Vula pages for all the instructional aspects. So students are able to see only in isiXhosa at the moment, but it gives them an alternative way to view the instructions of the text, to look at, you know, the key aims of the week, to engage with each other, and also to respond in different spaces.
And how did the students respond to that, to be allowed to express themselves in these various languages? Were they more receptive and willing to do so?
Yeah, I think the students really appreciated the inclusion of African languages in the space. I think because we were also, the course is aimed around getting them to understand text and writing in humanities, it was a great way to actually use language almost as a creative way for them to gain access into that space. I think as well, the flexibility of using translanguaging as a tool in the classroom and on the online space, also allows them to sort of build and strengthen the understanding of certain concepts, which was great. And I think it affirms their identity as well. So that is a great thing to have happen in a space that can feel quite alienating, the institution, or even like academic language and writing. So it was a great way for them to be able to be introduced into that space, and to not only engage with the text in that way, but also to express themselves, which is something that we really appreciated from using that approach.
I'm sure the other panel members are finding this of interest, including Luna, to be allowed to speak in a language that you're confident in. Our next question for you, Nikki, is to do with the Vula tools that you think enabled you to achieve that. Not only just the translanguaging, to be able to, for the students to express themselves in various languages, including African languages, but also to enable regular communication.
Right, so our primary Vula tool that we used was the lessons tool. For us, it was important that we kind of had a clear learning pathway for the students. And so each week we would look at a different aspect of, text and text genre and text representation. And so the lesson tool allowed us to create a clear learning pathway for them, with the inclusion of having the translations in isiXhosa, and then including, the videos or the images they were responding to, and having the comments tool, for example, they could go back, discuss with each other, tutors could comment. And so it really organized their learning in that way. So that was probably our primary tool that we used, which we felt was quite effective for engagement.
Thanks, Nikki. I hear you also mentioning the comments too, where they free to also express themselves in the African languages, or only in English? What was the practice?
So we encourage them to respond in any language they choose, which is always great, because we could see the different linguistic capital, like I said, that they bring to the space and converse with each other. And those who didn't speak any of the languages or who weren't confident enough to write in it would often go to Google Translate and just like, write something and bring it to the space. And so in that way, they were also stretching their understanding. We thought it was quite an interesting way to engage in conversation and quite a fun way for students to sort of engage with each other. So yeah, we definitely allow them to use any language they choose. And similarly, in some of the assignments, we said they could also use whichever language they chose. Most students tend to write in English anyway, even though they're given the opportunity. But I think because they could think in that way and read other people's comments, it just opened up the space for that inclusive aspect which we wanted.
Okay, like in any course, did you feel, and I know you're still teaching this course this year, that your students are more likely to attain or achieve the intended outcomes that you had for them?
Yeah, I mean, the course is still going on, so it's difficult to say at this point. But I definitely think that, using that approach in the space in the way that we did, definitely increased engagement by the students. They were definitely a lot more interested in engaging in the space, whether it be online through the comments or in the tutorial space itself, or even in the lecture, because we try to use the translanguaging approach in all those different spaces. And so, yeah, I think they really saw the benefit of it because they could bring a piece of themselves into the space. And often I think academia can be a very isolating experience because you're trying to gain acceptance into a space that we were really all trying to learn the language of academia. So it was a great tool of access for them to be able to use translanguaging and for us to do it not only in the tutorial space where we usually do it, but also in the online space as well.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki. That was quite interesting. We'll now hand over to Yakulun to have conversation with Mushumi about their example. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lila. Welcome, Mushumi. Thank you. Thank you for just allowing us to have this discussion with you concerning your course. Please tell us about your course, your students, and specifically what motivated you to really choose a visual learning modality and to enhance student engagement for the course.
So I teach representations of Africa at the Center for African Studies this semester. The idea behind the course is to situate in everything that has been written and said or shown about the continent, about its people, about its art, every aspect of it, how it's been represented, if it's been represented in the right way, if it's been misrepresented, if the students find themselves in those representations. And we question that. We try to build on their capacity to question it as well. That is the way the course runs. It's the direction of the course. And the way I added to it was with the visuals, some images, some photographs that have been taken from pre-colonial, from colonial Africa to post-colonial Africa. And the idea behind that is to get the students to now locate themselves in what I'm teaching them, in the theory that I'm teaching them, rather than only have a text where they're often disconnected from, or which they're disconnected from most of the time, because it's just a series of things that they will read, but they will never really find themselves in it. The moment it becomes a visual representation, then they can look at the image and go, is this me? Is this about me? Is this how I've been portrayed my entire life? Is this how my forefathers have been portrayed? So that the visual impact of that is an automatic internalization of the theory. And this is what we do at African Studies. And with a blended approach, it works perfectly now because it's a wholesome way for them to understand where they are, what they're learning, and even who's teaching them and who's giving them information about the continent and about themselves.
Really wonderful, Mushumi. So for the benefit of the audience here, the UDL connection is really the principle of engagement, which really is essential because it answers the why of learning in creating really resourceful students, knowledgeable students. So further in this discussion, I'll be foregrounding the two guidelines of UDL. One which is, they fall under UDL, of course, principle of engagement. One, of course, is recruiting interest. And secondly, is really providing, options of self-regulation.
Yes.
So my question to you, Mushumi, is, how did you recruit your students' interest to foster that active learner engagement?
A majority of the work is done by the Center for African Studies and the EDU. I only come in later on when they've set out a curriculum, which is in itself the most attractive for the students who, because they've chosen African Studies as their major or as one of their electives, there is already that fire, that passion in them to learn more about Africa or about themselves in Africa. So the curriculum is set out for them, for that passion to flow. And what I do is I build trust. I make sure that they know that this is a safe space for them as Africans or learners of Africa, or people who just want to observe from far or from inside. So that safe space is very important, which is where I come in. And what I usually do, and what I like to do now, especially since COVID, because I found that a lot of them had gone into more of an introverted space or an introvert way of engaging with academia or engaging with others, is I go to them. I find them wherever they are in life, not necessarily in the physical space, but in life, and I meet them there. I ask them, starting from small questions to big ones, who are you? Why do you want to do this subject? Talk to me about it. From that, we've built trust already, that they can tell me something. And I also share myself with them, and share who I am, where I've come from, why I studied African studies too. That becomes a safe space where they know I'm not talking to someone who's disconnected from me, who's teaching me from far up. It is someone who's right here, hearing me out. The safe space is built, the trust is there. And I move on from that. I grow with them as we go. We're no longer teacher, student. We are human beings trying to learn something together. And then the tools are there, the platforms are there that I can use. The university provides that. So that is the way I do it. Build trust and carry that into learning the curriculum.
Really wonderful, Mushumi. So you spoke about tools. What tools enabled you, whether within the learning management system or even any digital platform, but what tools did you use, as you're saying, trying to find them where they are, to connect with them, to really enhance that student engagement, that community, and how did that happen?
It happened, the use of those extra tools or the use of tools now, which I incorporate in my practice, in my teaching practice. The first one we had was WhatsApp, and that came because of COVID. Suddenly we were all locked down. I did not know how to reach my students. Most of them had to go back home. Email is almost inaccessible in certain parts of South Africa, if not the rest of Africa. We have we had to go into a space where we had to question what is the quickest way young people communicate today. And that is most often WhatsApp or Viber or some other very quick, low data taking platform. So we went into WhatsApp, which is also where I was able to build trust with the students. As soon as I had that one-on-one or in class, in person, trusted space, or trust space that they could feel safe in. That carried on to the online platform. We knew each other. They knew who they were talking to. They knew that they could talk to each other. And the WhatsApp was there to provide that extra space after school, after hours. They started sending each other little notes, little voice notes. Hey, I really liked that class today. Or, hey, like this theme is what I'm stuck on. And so the WhatsApp was the second, but cemented platform for us to talk. And then we moved on to Vula, and Vula provided the most wonderful space at that point was the forum. And the idea with the Center for African Studies is because we're building on criticality and critical thinking. We need them to constantly communicate or to have a line of communication that is going back and forth and up and down so that the criticality is built. It's not, we cannot do a dead end. This is a one sentence and it's over. No one is going to engage with it. We needed that constant communication to happen. And we did that through the forum. I would ask a question. They would speak to each other, fight each other about it. And I would observe in the background, steering the conversation, of course, but And we could have used other forms of other platforms. Vula provided that at the time and still does, like the Padlet.
Yes.
But the Padlet is not conducive to a full conversation the way we would have wanted it to go at African Studies. It's wonderful for other courses. For us, the forum was the best. And the beauty of using online is that the visuals that I needed to give them in class, I can now give them to keep, whether it be on Vula or on WhatsApp. They have that image, they had that link. It never goes away.
Yes.
And what I found more interesting in my practice changing into the blended approach is what I learned about it. And that came in the manner of, I had to be more careful what I'm presenting because it would stay online forever. It would stay with the students forever. And I had to have their consent first. If they would be too shocked with the images, with the photographs, because when they suddenly find themselves in the image and that will stay with them, I have to be careful what impact I'm having on them too. So I had to ask consent. And to ask consent, I had to first describe to them what the image would be about. I had to first describe to them what the video that I was sharing would be about. And suddenly I found myself rethinking my own practice prior to the blended approach, where I never necessarily thought about the impact, but also having to describe an image made me reconsider those students who are not necessarily always privileged in either getting a huge image to download. So we're talking access to data, but we're also talking about those students who are not necessarily full-sighted, if they have blurry vision, right, and their reading glasses are broken, or they don't have enough to have the reading glasses at hand. I had to first describe it to them. And with the videos, I had to also do the same thing. It's a long video. Can they sit through it? Do they have data for it? Will they be okay with it? So for those who did not have data for those long videos, I only could share with them the content, and therefore I just described what was in the video. So at the end, both the students, through the tools, they went into a different platform of learning, but I went into a different way of teaching too, where I became more aware and more considerate of those that were no longer just a black and white approach to teaching. My learners changed, I changed, and because of the blended approach.
Really powerful and strategic use of WhatsApp.
Yes,
that provided that insulation for students.
Absolutely.
And the forums as well, as you said, it's a collaborative space. You're able to even use images. That's the beauty of Vula, that it has various tools for you to interact with the students. So you mentioned, Moshumi, emotions, and you mentioned that your students come with passion. I'd imagine within African studies, they have their own motivations for enrolling in African studies. So why was it important for you to sort of address self-regulation, for them to sort of have that personal coping mechanism? And what was the outcome in you trying to achieve?
The passion is always there when you're 17, 18 years old and you're signing up for African studies. There's a reason for it. It's because you want to drive change. You want to be a change maker. You want to be the next revolution starter. You have it in you to bring about change in Africa or for South Africa, wherever you come from. That fire is great, and it is what we love and what we want to have at African studies. But because when you're so young, it still needs to be steered a little bit, and it needs to be steered with care and with teachers who are trained to steer it in the right and moral way, in the critical way too. The emotion, if we do not steer it, can become, or it could become uncontrollable. It could become dangerous too, because the topics that we address or the things that we have to face in Africa are not easy. Not easy on children, women, men, everybody in some way or form is living through one of the themes that we teach at the Center for African Studies. So it's hard, and when the students find themselves in it, it can only fuel the fire. but it has to be fueled in the moral way, in the ethical way, in the right way, so that it becomes productive at the end. And this is why we teach them through criticality and through speaking to each other first before they run into the bigger world, and then they have fights with everybody, to start here, to train themselves so that when we leave them as the adults of tomorrow in Africa, able to be productive in their conversations.
Kudos to you, Bushumi. Really great work that you're doing, and for you to even boldly embed UDL in your teaching practices. I definitely, in my opinion, believe that you have achieved the goal of UDL, of really not just creating ordinary students, but expert students who are expert in their own learning.
Yeah.
They're resourceful, they're knowledgeable, and they're not just now thinking of the African context, but they're able to relate it even elsewhere in Africa. So that's really amazing work to you. And I'll hand over to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Yakilintu. Welcome, Luna. Thank you so much for joining us today. So briefly tell us about your students and the challenges that you face during tutorial groups, especially with trying to promote student engagement.
Sure, thanks so much for the question. So my students were primarily first-year students that were scattered across either the general BA program where they majored in theatre and dance studies, or they were doing the BA theatre and performance or the diploma programs. And a lot of the challenges that I faced was around bringing such a naturally performative or affective discipline, the discipline of theatre, dance, and performance, to bring it alive in the sort of, in the digital space. And then apart from that, I needed to, a lot of the challenges that part of the challenges that I faced was around how to sort of like promote relatability to my students, in myself, and then also what I needed to do to recruit students' interest in order to get them to engage. So I used, digital tools like the Jamboard, Padlet, Twitter, even formerly Flipgrid to enhance some student engagement.
Yeah, so let's get into that. When we refer to the UDL framework, we can look at two principles that I think you applied very well, two checkpoints of the principle of multiple means of engagement. Firstly, I think you are very adept at using multiple means for communication, and through that, to foster collaboration and community. So I would like you to tell us, which tool did you select, and how did you use that tool when trying to enhance engagement with your students?
Sure. I want to be the tool that I used specifically was Google Jamboard. I want to explain basically how I used it. I just want to give a little bit of insights into, I suppose, my teaching philosophy, or parts of my teaching philosophy. In part, or one of the drivers of my teaching philosophy is empathy, and I highlight empathy because that is something that all of us have as humans, I believe, but sometimes in teaching and learning encounters, and even under regulated conditions, or under regulated conditions of teaching and learning, I suppose it's not common it's not uncommon for those in teaching positions to deny themselves the opportunity to express that empathy. And I noticed that there was a dip in engagement as the semester progressed, and this concerned me, not because of how grades in the course might look, or how the grades of my tatlings would look, but more so, or because of what the course convener might say, but more so because I was genuinely concerned with what the student as a human was going through, the things that they were going through that were causing them to not engage with a course, because you are human first before you are a student. So it was important for me to sort of like intervene in a way that was driven by my teaching philosophy, just to take from the previous panel. But Google Jamboard, I've tutored across a number of courses, but more specifically the Plustat, provided me with a sort of meaningful space to probe like really deep engagement. In the first instance, this is because this was because of the nature of what brings people to the +STAT, or why students register for the +STAT. And these are either students on extended degrees or on diploma programs, students who have been determined by a higher education system as needing extra support, but also students who have historically been done a dirty by the basic education system, and who are facing the aftermath and the effects of a deeply unequal society and educational landscape. And as I mentioned, there came a point in the semester where students stopped attending, and I discovered that students felt a bit disconnected with each other, and engagement in the asynchronous aspects of the work on Vula also started to dwindle. And then I used some of the time in a specific tutorial to facilitate students through a group reflection and discussion using the Jamboard. And some of the prompts that I invited them to reflect on using Jamboard, those like things like, what does the +STAT mean to you? What aspects of the course are you struggling with? How can I as your tutor what can I as your tutor do to better the +STAT experience for you? And what also, of course, what could they do to enhance the +STAT experience for themselves? Also just to remind them of that agency that they have.
Yes, I think that is so wonderful. What would you say was the outcome of implementing these tools? And do you see yourself implementing it in the future now that we are moving out of emergency remote teaching and back to face-to-face teaching?
Thanks so much. To answer part of the second question before I forget it, because I ramble so much sometimes, I've continued to use a lot of a lot of tools and some of these similar methods to promote engagements in all of the other spaces that I practice, the work of scholarship, the work and the scholarship of teaching and learning. To speak specifically to some of the outcomes that was achieved was that, firstly, it was an opportunity for reflexive, for me, one of the biggest outcomes was that I had the opportunity to practice practice reflexively, which led to a strengthening of my practice and even deeper awareness of the students' needs. An outcome was that it gave me deeper insights and perspectives into the intersections of society and how they all, mesh together in the learning environment. And in this way, the students, when they contributed towards the Jamboard, their insights and their perspectives contributed towards a co-curated or even a co-created learning space. And specifically, this intervention led to a renegotiation of the social or the learning contract that we did at the first tutorial at the start of the semester. But the intervention led to a reframing of the learning environment where many felt more comfortable to, bring their vulnerabilities into the space. Moshumi spoke about this as well. And the tutorial space was also perceived as a safe and a brave space, but also a reflective and a supportive space. And what the beauty of what came from that Jamboard exercise was that I observed how the students connected with each other a bit more differently than how they engaged with each other before. And another outcome that I'm particularly fond of is how students that I've engaged with, when I walk past them at upper campus or at lower campus or at Heading or wherever I find them, they often speak to me and tell me or reflect with me about how they have seen that it's possible for a teacher or a tutor to be, humane and put that humanness first. But I think that that was also possible because I was open to reflecting on and sharing my positionality with them, the intersections of my life, what led me to teaching and learning, but also what I struggled with and how I could relate to students. Another outcome from the process was that we negotiated what the tutorial space would look like going forward. Students voiced more of what they would like to see more of. And when I bump into some of them now, even on campus, I can also hear the appreciation that they feel about the fact that they felt included in the tutorial space. And it shows how much value there is in bringing students on board as a partner in designing the designing of their learning experiences and these spaces. And if we speak about what it means to unleash human potential for a fair and just society, I believe that we need students as partners. We need students as partners, and we need them at the table, and dare I say, be the dominant voice in the designing of their teaching and learning experiences.
Thank you, Luna, so much for this insightful example. Back to you, Tula.
Thank you, Tim, for these exciting examples from all of you. We want to now recap a bit and say, for the benefit of our remote audience, what each one of these examples demonstrate to us is that, yes, when you redesign your courses, your blended courses, you do that with a purpose. And from each of these examples, we could, the purpose came through very clearly for us, and well done for sharing that with us. And then we take it a step further to say, now we're working with this framework, a descriptive framework to help us be intentional in, now that we have a purpose, how do we build it in the courses that we are redesigning. And then from all these shared experiences, we learned that people were not just explicit with the principle that they were working from, but also they had a set of guidelines how to actually put that into practice. And what is even more exciting about the UDL framework that we are sharing with you is that it also has checkpoints. As I'm redesigning the course, now and again, I have opportunity to check if I'm still on track, if I'm not leaving my students behind, because we all know that that's very important. And I'll just share with us a few of such checkpoints, one of them being, have I promoted expectations and beliefs that will optimize my student motivation, so that as I'm preparing on how my students will be learning in that course, I keep checking myself and then responding. If I still need more work in this area, I go back and make sure that that is done appropriately. So at this point, we are opening space for our audience and even our panel members, panel collaborators, to ask any question, and we will try to respond as well as we can. Thank you. We don't seem to have any question so far. But this may be the opportunity for us to reflect on these shared experiences that we had with student engagement. Does this come easily for us to activate student engagement in the courses that we teach? We can share both as our tutors or teaching staff, as well as students ourselves who have been in these blended courses. Anybody who wants to share first?
Well, I think from a student's perspective, it can be very intimidating to engage in the online space, and especially I think of first years that started in 2020, having to never been to campus, having to have the guts to try and engage with what seems like a faceless group. And I think that's what makes it so special that an academic like yourself, Mashumi, took the time to individually connect with your students and to create a space of psychological safety. And I think that really enhances learning. And I also love the comment from you, Luna, where by implementing these UDL practices, not only did your students have positive outcomes, but you as an educator as well.
if I may respond to what Kristen is saying there, I think that thank you I thank you for sharing your reflection on that comment, but I also think that your even to get a lot of ourselves there and in beyond this panel, like in the spirit of in the spirit of reflecting, connecting and envisioning, and also for those watching, I think that what is important for us is to understand the firstly how they engage and why students engage the way they engage. Also goes down to like understanding their lived experiences, and perhaps use a short example from like myself and my context to think about what is happening like on the Cape Flats, literally less than 10 minutes away from our campus. Many of our students and our staff dodge literal bullets to get to campus every day due to ongoing, gang violence and violent killings that people aren't exposed to in the that people don't hear about in the mainstream media. And the nature of teaching and learning is one week where we expect the student to show up fully, but how can they show up fully when they can better show up fully when we as academics show that we are making attempts to understand their lived experience. Yeah.
Add to this, I think it's every end of semester when I sit with how much work was put into getting one group of students out for the next graduation or for the next semester, is when I recognize when you're doing it, you can get complacent about it. But I need the Center for African Studies, I need the EDU, I need the UDL practices, I need myself and I need my students. When we recognize that it's no longer, I go into a classroom, I teach a bunch of students, send them home. What has changed about learning and teaching, especially at UCT, is all the processes that we're putting in place for a more wholesome learning experience for the students. We're doing it for them now.
Yeah. I've heard many times that teaching staff complain that the students are very passive and they are not, they do not actively engage in courses. So hopefully these examples are showing us that it can be done. I now have two questions for you, panel. The first one is directed at Moshumi, Luna, and Nikki. The person is saying, thank you very much, panelists, for an insightful and interesting discussion about redesigning blended courses. And now, having interacted with principles of UDL, which focus vastly on student engagement, expression, and representation, how do you intend on intensifying and deepening the use of UDL principles in your courses? And secondly, which other principles of UDL do you intend to focus on going forward? You want to go first, Luna? Answer any. Oh.
Sure, I'm quite happy to. So the first question I'm also just looking at it here on the side just to make sure that I'm not going off track. How do I intend on intensifying and deepening the use of UDL principles in my courses? One of the things that or one of the principles or that I haven't because time is such a big constraint for many of us. I think from a course design aspect or like learning materials design aspect, the time, effort, and care that goes into differentiating materials so that there is multiple means for multiple means of representation. That is something that because of time, I haven't been able to, channel as much or invest as much time into, the differentiation of materials. But from my side, that is something that I hope to intensify and deepen. Yeah.
Time. Thank you very much, everybody. we've had a very great time exploring how to enhance engagement in our courses. Thank you. Bye, everybody.